Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our town hall meeting to discuss the fiscal year 2022 budget, as well as to provide updates on fiscal years 20 and 21. I'm Joan Farini-Mundy. I'm the president of the University of Maine and the University of Maine at Machias, and I am joined by several colleagues who will all be speaking to you as a part of this presentation. John Volin, who is Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs and Provost. Joanne Yastremski, who is our new Interim Vice President for Finance and Chief Business Officer at the University of Maine and for UMaine Machias, and Dan Qualls, who is Vice President for Academic Affairs and the head of campus at UMaine Machias. And again, I'm delighted to be with you all. Happy New Year and all the best as we begin 2021. We will be holding other open forums in the next few weeks as our students return, as our faculty and staff are fully back on our campus, and talk about a number of ranges of issues as we get together then. But our focus today is on budget. And I wanted to just point out a couple of things. We can go to the next slide, Joanne. One is that we are inviting your questions throughout this session, and a reminder that you can do that by submitting them to umaine.alerts@maine.edu or add them to the chat, and we'll be watching those in real time, and we'll answer them as we can as they come up. I also should say that for those of you who work in and around universities, you know that we're generally working on 3 budgets at a time. We're right now pretty much, I think, done with fiscal 20, although there are still some summary information items that will come through in the next couple of weeks about that. We are in the middle of fiscal year 21. Our fiscal year ends at the end of June. And then we are beginning the planning for fiscal year 22, which starts, of course, in July of 21. So we'll be trying to talk about all 3 in this call. And we know that people will have questions as we go. So the overview of the session is this. Next slide. We'll talk about the key contexts in which we think about the development of budgets for our universities in the nation, in our state. All of this is very dynamic right now, as you would expect, as we move through the pandemic and so many other considerations influencing the way the budget looks. Secondly, we'll do a bit of a primer for folks on how the UMaine system and UMaine Machias budget processes and timelines work. And you'll hear quite a lot about this from Joanne. Rather brief summaries of how fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 21 ended up or are progressing, and then a focus on what we're doing to plan for fiscal 22. We'd like throughout for you to think about the questions that you may have and get them to us as we've indicated, but also we'd like to talk about how you can stay updated and be involved in these processes going forward. And I again want to share that fiscal 20 and 21 have been very complicated because of so many uncertainties caused by the pandemic that we've even, the regular process has been changed a bit in terms of the numbers of back and forth conversations we've had with our board of trustees, for example, on budget approvals. But what we're aiming for 22 will be approved budgets to happen in the summer. So with that, we'll jump right into the contexts that we face and that we actually in many ways both find as challenges and find as tremendous benefits. Our budget is very much influenced by what's going on around us. And so within the state of Maine, there have been 2 major documents that have been prepared in the last few months, and we pay attention to them as the land grant university in particular. Being very integrated with what's happening in our state is crucial for our own fulfillment of our mission. So the Maine Economic Recovery Committee that produced a report in the end of the fall is very important to watch. That's a group of people from around the state that are very concerned with what it will take to come out of this, the economic challenges arising from the pandemic. Related to this is the new 4-year plan for climate action, the Maine Won't Wait report of the Maine Climate Council. Again, much information there that has to do with our own research and public engagement mission, as well as our instructional mission. And so we are aware of that document. We've had a very good year in research at UMaine, and we'll talk a bit more about that later, but incoming grants at about $125 million, and expenditures for research broadly measured 165 million, best year ever. And so we have a growing research enterprise that we aim to have very well integrated with our instructional enterprise. We've been working all year long on position management, and I think that you'll hear a bit about that from Joanne as we go forward, because to be honest, these have been challenging months fiscally for us, as well as in so many other ways in our system. The Alphon Foundation, the extraordinary $240 million award to the University of Maine system, with its 4 focal areas of student success: the Maine College of Engineering, Computing and Information Science, the Maine Graduate and Professional Center, and of course, Black Bear Athletics, all major components for us. Not that they intersect directly with our regular E&G budget preparation, but they are very essential as we think about how, for example, student success is central to our own viability and to retention. And so lots of interlocking pieces here. Coronavirus speaks for itself in some ways. I wish to pause here briefly to thank everyone on this call who has gone above and beyond in so many ways to be a part of helping the university and the University of Maine system even cope with and manage through what has been a devastating pandemic for the world, for the country, and of course for so many families and people here in the state of Maine. And we're very much changed by that activity. And I thank everyone who's been so resilient and so positive throughout all of it. And we have now unified accreditation, a tool for the entire University of Maine system that allows us new ways of collaborating with universities across the state, new ways of scaling our programs, and making sure that all of our students have access to a wide range of options statewide. With that, I'm going to turn to Provost Vollen, who will talk about the frameworks through which we work on budget planning. So, John.
Okay. Great, thank you very much, President Farini Mundy, and welcome everyone. Can't see you, but I'm glad you're joining us here. So as the President just said, all budget planning and execution does happen within our strategic framework. So the Strategic Visions and Values Framework, our SVV, as you've I'm sure heard over the last few years, it was developed over a 2-year process with many of you, right? With this broad community involvement. It's designed to be a living framework that guides the university in our planning. Our shared values, so if you look right here, you can see it on the PowerPoint, are fostering learner success, creating and innovating for Maine and beyond, and growing and stewarding partnerships. This really drives our planning and our decision making. As the pandemic was starting to begin last year, we developed along with our SVV the Define Tomorrow initiative, which really is an extension of SVV. And from all of you, we got over 250 ideas that were submitted relating to where we could grow and reorganize, generate additional revenue, look for reduced costs, and how we should prioritize in this kind of post-pandemic world. So when I arrived in August, we expanded the steering committee of Define Tomorrow. We began again the process of reviewing and sorting these ideas that were submitted, and identifying themes and hopefully potential collaborations. The steering committee has just recently finished reviewing all 250 plus proposals, and by the end of February, we're hopeful to be able to share some of these results with the overall community. But that is what drives our budget planning and execution, our strategic framework. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the President.
Thank you, John. Another driver, of course, is the fact that we are part of the University of Maine system. As one would expect, there are several performance indicators that are tracked by the system and therefore that are of quite great importance to us in our universities. And this is just a very cursory description of what this all is. We could, if people are interested, do a much more detailed look into the KPIs, but I wanted to share it because it's really a very important piece of our context. Not only does strategic vision and values need to drive us strategically, but the KPIs need to be out there in terms of our awareness and the accountability that we need to have as good fiscal managers and stewards. And so overall, what you see here is the graphic that describes, with right there in the middle, the ultimate number that we are interested in for each campus and for the system, which is a composite financial index that comprises these 4 separate indices that you see around the circle in the next layer. So just very briefly, and the words are all here, and I'm not going to say a whole lot more, but the calculation of each of these ratios is done regularly for each campus. And then there is a roll up into a system level number. So primary reserve ratio is basically, are the resources sufficient and flexible enough to support the mission? And on that measure, University of Maine is relatively strong. UMaine Machias has had a bit of a downturn, but is beginning to level off. And we could go into great depth about what is included there, but it is something that we track and watch very carefully. Down below, do the operating results indicate that the institution is living within its available resources? This is something that we really need to pay very careful attention to. It's related to our size. It's related to our ambitions and whether we have the resources to actually pursue them. And when Joanne comes on and explains how our budget works, I hope that people will take away from that the fact that we are essentially in control of all of this, right? We certainly are very dependent upon and grateful for the state appropriation, but the budget is a look at our expenses and at our revenues and looking at the ways that we strategically can make those balance. And so this is a piece of doing that. The other 2, asset performance and management, supporting the strategic direction. Again, we obviously are paying careful attention to whether we are investing in ways and all of our assets are being used in ways that support where we're going. And then finally, are we managing the debt and our financial resources adequately for the viability ratio? If you're interested in this sort of thing, you can find more about it at this dashboard that's been noted here. But I pointed out primarily to indicate that there are so many pieces that influence a budget. I wanted to take this chance for people to see a little bit more about it. Let's next talk about what's happening at the state level. So Governor Mills has released her 22-23 biennial budget, and we are very pleased with the way that looks. It proposes funding for UMaine system at essentially the pre-curtailment numbers, and therefore it would be at about 198 million for E&G, 17.35 for MEIF, essentially flat. And that's really good news in a year when we actually were potentially planning for as much as a 10.4% reduction. Now, again, this is the governor's presentation, and this next step, of course, includes legislative consideration and their actions. Also, the supplemental budget for 21 includes 2.5 million in new one-time funds for our early college programs. Again, very grateful to see those funds coming our way. And the CARES funding that came out in fiscal 2021 was used to reimburse the system at 8.1 million for fall testing and PPE. This is 21 money. And the conversations are continuing about assistance for future costs. So you might find it interesting to know that we do our best to track COVID-specific additional costs in the system and in the university so that we are positioned when these relief dollars are made available, positioned to reimburse ourselves when possible. We continue to move forward with the best practices and the most appropriate actions, and then are very pleased when reimbursement is actually able to follow. There also is a lot happening at the federal level, and these areas are always intertwined. The new COVID relief bill does include $20.2 billion for direct relief to post-secondary institutions, the result of a lot of work by major coalitions of higher education institutions and tremendous engagement of our delegation in Maine in particular. The estimated relief to the University of Maine will be $12 million, although these dollars aren't here yet and aren't ready for dispersal yet, and to UMM at $600K, with about a third going directly to students. And all of the deployment of those dollars is yet to come and will be worked out as quickly as we can. One thing we did very well in the system with the CARES Act dollars in 2020 was to get those out rapidly. The funding is a bit more flexible with this act. And so all of that is being analyzed now. We're very pleased to be able to have that help. I will say that this act is focused in general ways. And in a moment, we will talk about some of the challenges to our research enterprise, where we are very hopeful about future action from the federal government that may help us in that area. Next slide, please. I mean, I guess it's sort of obvious to say the pandemic has been costly in so many ways, and here are the fiscal ways in which it has affected our university. Approximately $21 million of lost net E&G and auxiliary revenues, 30 plus million of lost productivity and research revenue. And we're prepared to go into more detail about what those numbers mean and look like. One thing I would say about our research enterprise, and it's been the case for the last several months, is that our researchers have in many situations shifted their work to instead take up work that would be of great importance to the state, which means that the research that they may have had funded with other federal dollars has gone on hold in some cases, being delayed, not necessarily the major focus of the work. It also can mean that folks aren't as able to get as many proposals out because they're very engaged in working on the pandemic-related issues. And so there's a lot there being considered in that number. The COVID-related costs to date, 6.4 million. And with our increased testing plan, which we're very excited about and very pleased about for this semester, there will be additional costs as well. And we know that the challenges for students, faculty, and staff have been tremendous through this. Again, I wish to thank everyone for all that you've been able to do. We are looking very much forward to seeing people back on campus beginning next week as the return to campus testing starts up, but then on the 25th of January when we go back to classes, a combination of on-site, face-to-face courses and multiple modalities in the best ways we know how to serve our students. We are mindful of the mental health issues that so many people are facing, and we are in fact organizing ourselves to try to address that as effectively as we can with our students. So we, with that, we'll pause and ask if there are questions just about this section before we move into the fiscal 21 and 20 summaries. And a reminder of where to send your questions into the chat or into the to the address that I gave at the beginning. And if we don't see them at this point, we'll keep watching. But I think then what we will do is make our shift to talk about fiscal year 2020. And with that, I will turn to Interim Vice President Jastrzębski.
Thank you very much, President Mundy. Can everyone hear me okay? Shake yes, okay. Thank you. So I'm going to start with tell you where we were with ending the year for year 20. Since we last had our last town hall, why we finished our audit for year 20. And we show you these audited numbers in this abbreviated form of a pie chart for me to just pause for a minute and let you see this information. So you see we had total operating revenues of around $447 million for the University of Maine and $451.8 million for operating expenses. So you see that our revenue was something in the $4 million range, $4.7 million range below our operating expenses, experiencing a deficit for fiscal year 20. Now that deficit is on an audited basis, and it has certain accruals in there that make it appear that way for audited purposes. But I want you to know that on a cash flow basis, why we were able to break even or a little bit better for fiscal year 20. Just wanted to make a couple comments about these pie charts. I'll show you UMaine Machias in just a minute. You see that tuition and fees is 39% of the total, and state appropriation 22% of the total revenues, just to get grounded on where our reliance is on revenues. And then if we just go to the next slide for UMaine Machias, See a similar reliance, a little bit different on the ratios, 28% for tuition and fees, and state appropriation 41%. So just pause for just a minute and let you see those numbers, see if you have any questions. I would just say these are all funds. Sometimes when we present budgets, we present our unrestricted budget, which is our E&G and our auxiliary budget combined. But for the purposes of audited financial statements, it's all funds, which includes the research component as well. Okay. So thank you all for your help to help us get through 2020. Why, as soon as the pandemic started in March 2020, we all got together, we all got on board, we curtailed travel, we scrutinized and we slowed hiring, and we really looked very carefully at position management. We reduced spending across the board, and we even froze travel cards and pro cards at that period of time. Then we also did a great deal to increase our faculty and our teacher assistant, our TA support. John might want to say something about that. And of course, we're so appreciative for the CARES Act funding to help get us through March of 2020 and get through 2020. Some of the CARES Act went directly to the students. Some went to help the UMaine system. And as I mentioned a minute ago, we ended the year with near break-even cash flow. So thank you all so much to help us get through 2020. I don't know, John, if you want to say something about that increase in faculty and TA support.
Well, thank you, Joanne. I'd be happy to. We've had a lot of support. The university in 2016 developed the Center for Innovation in Teaching and Learning, CITL. And if you look over from March of last year through December, compared to the previous year, where faculty and TAs, about 400 faculty participate in different workshops, et cetera. In that same period last year during the pandemic, over 3,000 faculty and TAs got support through CITL. It really was this huge community effort. And it was across the university. So yes, thank you for pointing that out.
We also want to just not leave 2020 without giving you a little bit more information about that great news, that very good news about our research year. We brought in $125.4 million in grants. That was the highest ever for the University of Maine. Our total research expenditures is $165 million, the largest ever for the University of Maine. You can see what a big difference research has on this line called indirect cost recovery, where you see this growing increase in this line, indirect cost recovery, to over 10 million in for year 20. Why that it directly impacts our bottom line, our E&G support. So we're all in this together, and whatever we can do to grow research helps all components of UMaine, and in particular E&G revenue. I think we're ready for questions, President Farini Mundy, for year 20. You're on mute.
Still on mute, President.
I've been talking so brilliantly for so long. First question that we have seen here has to do with expense reimbursement. Will some of the COVID-related expense reimbursements be making their way to departments for their expenses? So I'll let Joanne think about that for a moment. The next is a question about fiscal 22 investments to realize the commitment announced last year to racial justice. And we will discuss that in the 22 section. And then I also would say, though, that on racial justice, I hope people are aware that last summer, beginning of the fall, we launched the President's Commission on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the University of Maine. And that commission will be releasing its first set of report recommendations early next week. So all is moving on that front, but we'll talk about that in 22. Joanne, would you help us please with the first question about reimbursements directly to departments?
Yeah, so I think we're really referring to for year 21, the year we're in, when we talk about reimbursements to the departments. And we have been keeping track of all the COVID expenses going into the all departments, all aspects of the university, not personnel cost, but direct costs, some personnel costs, some temporary personnel costs. And why we expect to be able to reimburse for some of those in the new COVID relief bill that just got announced in December. We don't have information on that yet. I understand there's a Department of Education meeting this afternoon to talk about the COVID relief bill, but we need to get a little more information to learn more about those details.
Okay, thank you. And thanks for the questions. We'll come back to the question about diversity, equity, inclusion in 22. Let's move now to 21. That's the year we are in. So let's talk about where we stand. And again, we'll have John and Joanne engaged in this discussion, but we'll begin, I believe, with John.
Great, thank you. So the first slide, I would like to talk about our FTE enrollments, which of course, as you probably know, is key to our budget. And I think there was some trepidation as we were going into the fall 20 about our numbers, but in reality, we did really well. So if you look at our overall UMaine undergraduate numbers from fall 19 to fall 2020, you'll see that our overall, we're fairly flat, down just a little bit on our undergraduate numbers there. And a real success story was the graduate school. And we see a large increase in our total graduate student numbers. And so overall, we are fairly flat for the fall compared to the previous fall. University of Maine Machias numbers are quite a bit lower. Actually, they had about 10% hit from the previous fall, so they are definitely lower, and this is something we are looking at.
I think if it's okay, I'd like to invite Dan to comment there if he wishes on the Machias numbers.
Yeah, we've started this spring. We've started a pretty big advisathon, and we've been working to remove holds that students have on their accounts, and that is going on right now as we speak. But advisors are working today in getting those holds removed so folks can enroll.
That's great. Thank you, Dan. So if we can move to the next slide, put this a little bit in the national context. So if you look at our degree-seeking bachelor's degree students, undergrads, UMaine is in blue there. Green is University of Maine at Machias. The yellow is the National Public Four-Year Institutions. And so what you see on the left-hand side there in the degree-seeking bachelor's degree students, you see that what I was just showing you previously, that we're flat, right? We were at 0% essentially. The national average was down 1%. In this case, Machias, which offers undergraduate programs, was down 12% from 2020 over 2019. As I said on the previous slide, our real success was in the graduate area, and you can see, in fact, the national average for public four-year institutions was 5%. And we saw a 14% increase in our graduate students. The incoming first-year students, nationally, there was a reduction overall for public four-year institutions, and we weren't alone in that. We were down 4%, which was half of what the national average was at 8%. And the incoming first-year students in Machias, quite a bit lower, and something that, as Dan was just talking about, they are addressing and working on this. Dan, do you want to add anything to this?
No, I think that's good. Thanks.
So, I mean, we don't know historically why. I mean, we do know that, if we look at the grad student numbers, we do see that historically during economic downturn times, we'll see, an increase, and that could be part of it. But at the same time, we have had a lot of growth in our UMaine online grad programs that are very accessible to individuals that, potentially are reluctant to study face-to-face. And so I think we were also very well positioned, with our world-class graduate programs to see. It shouldn't have been so unexpected that we saw this 14% increase. So I think I will end there. Turn it over to the president.
And I will turn it back to Joanne.
Okay, so let you take a minute to see a chart for our year 21 budget, and then I'm going to frame it, and I'm going to take you through some of the highlights. So the first thing I wanted to say is that you'll see that the revenue for year 20, the year that we just ended at 149 million, this is for University of Maine, is being budgeted down at 144 million for the year 21 budget. That includes the E&G and the auxiliary. And the primary reason for that, as I'm sure most of you know, is the dining and residence revenue, because we are not nearly at full capacity for our residential halls for this year, and especially for this fall, and continuing to see a decline in the spring. The next point that I want to make is with regard to the state appropriation. So we have a flat state appropriation for year 20 and also budgeted for year 21. We're very thankful for the state for their contribution to and grant to the University of Maine, and it's looking very strong for next year as well. The next point I want to make is with regard to the largest component of our expenses, which is compensation and benefits. And that number is approximately 58% compensation benefits of our total operating expenses. That's pretty consistent from year to year. So you can see why it's so important for us to so carefully manage position management, our workforce, and compensation. So having said all of that, why we have a bottom line deficit for year 21 of 9.4 million that the board approved in the October timeframe of last year. This was a revised budget given the COVID situation. $9.4 million deficit budgeted, made up of both E&G of 4.4 and auxiliary of 4.9. And that compares to that positive cash flow budget that I mentioned earlier for year 20. So quite a big difference. And we're going to continue to see issues. This is the budget. This is not the forecast for year 21. We're only halfway through the year. And so we need to get through the rest of the year and monitor this bottom line carefully. I'm going to say a few more words about that in a minute. Same kind of situation for University of Maine at Machias, with this net student charges being a little bit less from 20 to 21 for showing that for revenue, and then for expenses as well, and for a total bottom line deficit of 65,000 that was approved by the board in October, as compared to a positive cash flow in year 20. So to put some text or some explanations as to where we are in year 21, we're going to experience close to a $10 million deficit in this year. We're hoping it's going to be less than that because we do have the pending funding from the COVID relief bill. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, and President Farini Monday mentioned, this will help offset COVID-related expenses, and even at the department level, will help offset revenue losses. But we're still trying to figure out how that COVID relief bill will be applied. But at the same time, our spring enrollments are still coming in. They're critical. All that you can do to help with student success and bringing those spring enrollments up to our expectations, which is pretty much about a 1% decline from last year. And then auxiliary revenues as well. We are down from our capacity of 3,500 students. We're down to perhaps around 2,200 students, maybe a little bit more than that as of this writing. We're beginning to see drops in students most every day. So auxiliary revenues continue to be significant decline as students opt out of housing in the spring semester. And then we also have the revenue losses associated with athletics because we don't have opportunity to assembly. No one is watching the sports in person. Student financial aid impacts, Collins Center for the Arts, conference services, and so forth. So what we can use all the help that everyone can give us to help us get through 2021 and lower that $10 million deficit, which we'll use reserves. We have reserves in the $49 million range between the UMaine and UMaine Machias. I'm ready for questions. All of us are ready for questions for year 21.
And we have a few. I will add in at this point that this whole brief discussion that Joanne brought up about reserves takes us back to those KPIs. That reserve number is one that's really quite important to looking at our long-term viability. And so when we do need to go to reserves for essentially what are one-time costs, we then need to figure out how to balance those major structural gaps in the budget rather than continue to count on that solution. So that's a part of the work, and you'll hear more about that for 22. But here is a question. Do we have a breakdown of the increase, decrease of graduate students in person versus online only? And I'll attempt it and then turn to John. That we can get that information. It's going to be a little bit idiosyncratic to the particular moment that we are in, because so much is online that might not necessarily have been. But for programs that are officially designated as online, at least one that I do know about, the MBA program, enrollments are way up in the online version. And this is a fantastic finding for us, because when we have high quality programs that are interesting to people around not only the state, but the country and the world, those are wonderful ways to engage the University of Maine much more broadly. The provost may have more detail, but I'm sure we can get it.
And the one that comes to my mind too, President for any Monday, is the MBA, which was at a record high this last fall at 344 students. They're expecting this spring possibly close to 370, and in the fall possibly projected at greater than 400. For other specific numbers, we can get those for you and be happy to post them.
And Joanne, here's one for you. With the decline in auxiliary revenues, are they going to see any cuts in spending, e.g. staff?
So there are no plans for cutting spending in staff for auxiliary revenues at this time. We have closed down a dining hall for the spring. Thank you for the question. We have closed down Wells Dining for the spring semester, and that is to save money, and because we have lower residential students on campus, and it's so that we didn't think, and we tested it, that any service would suffer from the shutdown of Wells Commons for residential dining this spring. We've been able to accommodate the students in other ways for their dining needs. And Wells Common, by the way, I think it has been reported that will be used for COVID testing this spring. So it's a good use of the facility when it's not going to be used for dining. That is the extent of our decisions at this point as far as auxiliary operations and savings programs.
And that's related to another question, and I appreciate these questions very much. They're frank and straightforward questions. If there will be a salary reduction or furlough, when would faculty and staff hear about that? Again, at this moment, there are no plans for either of those, and I hope that you'll recognize by now that we're seeking to be as transparent and timely in our communications as we can. So I can't give a direct answer to it. There isn't a plan for that, but we certainly will be keeping you apprised. And we want you to understand the budget situation, but we also want people to be hopeful about the budget situation. We are getting excellent support from the state. We are getting some federal relief. We are planning for 22 in ways that have engaged the campus broadly. And so I hope we can also stay focused on the fact that we're very committed to keeping learning going here and to keeping our university thriving. There's another question here that's about 21, actually. Nice question. Will self-administering COVID tests be cost effective? Will self-administering COVID tests be cost effective for the upcoming spring semester? I see many state systems adopting self-service COVID testing kits for incoming students. So again, the details about our testing program are still not fully rolled out yet. And I know people are eager and interested, and we can do another one of these town halls soon to take up all the testing questions, because they are great questions and they're in the fine print and they're in the science. And so we'd be very prepared to talk about all of that. But as for the self-administered test, like I have friends at other institutions where they test twice a week and they drop their sample in a drop box and those are taken and analyzed. The University of Maine does not have the laboratory clearances and permissions or even the capability to do that self-administration of our own unsupervised tests, which requires certain kinds of FDA approvals and others. So instead, we are not using, we'll be going toward a supervised testing regime, which is more cost effective in the end, rather than some sort of self-administered testing, which we would still need to send out for analysis. But the testing technologies are under constant improvement, and you can trust that the Scientific Advisory Board and everyone else is watching that very carefully to be sure that we are doing the very best we can for our faculty, staff, and students. Why are personnel costs up so much for this year over last year? To Joanne.
Thank you. So remember, when I presented that slide, which I could go back to if you'd like me to, I presented the actual for year 20 with the budget for year 21. So as we go through the year, the budget will always be higher than the actual for personnel, because we have vacancy savings. You know that we have positions that are not filled. So when we close the year for year 21, you will see savings from that budgeted number. And those savings help offset that bottom line deficit too. And we'll be watching that carefully, because you're all helping us manage positions so carefully. We will see the final actual number for personnel be lower than what's budgeted. I hope that I ask again if I don't get the answer, that don't explain the answer well enough for you. The other reason, of course, is there are some increases in the budgeted benefits from last year to this year. So there's an increase in the benefit rate. So that there's multiple things going on there, but we will reforecast for year 21, and when we do that reforecast, that compensation and benefits number will look a little different. It will look a little bit lower because of the vacancy savings.
So there are a couple of nice questions about vaccine, and I'll do my best with them, but that's very much a moving target and a constantly changing dynamic. First of all, I would point out that the state of Maine is doing, I believe, the best in the nation in terms of getting its vaccine doses deployed as they come. And so that's been very encouraging. The question, a couple of questions related to rebounding from COVID constraints. Is there any discussion of eventually implementing a campus level vaccination program? And then would the campus receive potential state or federal support for such a vaccination effort? Okay, so just to take those up, Certainly on the question of would we actually discuss a campus level vaccination program? We're in very close contact with Maine CDC and the Department of Health and Human Services in the state of Maine to really work with them as we move through the different phases and the sub phases of vaccine deployment. And so if you're watching the press, you're seeing a lot of stories in the Press Herald and the Bangor Daily News about the state's plan, which continues to be adjusted for which groups are in which phases and tiers of the rollout of vaccine. And there are websites, Maine CDC website, to watch that as well. And as I say, we're in conversation with them. And as we learn about when the vaccines will be available, certainly after frontline health workers and others, when they'll be available to higher ed faculty, as well as students, that will all be factored into how we plan for vaccine administration. And it'll be in partnership with the state. And we'll be paying careful attention to what our own capacity is, because of course we will also have an increased testing program going on in the spring. So we'll need to partner in order to take care of the vaccine vaccine issues. University of Maine is very experienced with vaccine deployment and has been a point of distribution for vaccinations and in other circumstances. And so I'm very confident in our expert public health people here at UMaine to adjust to whatever the circumstances are for getting vaccine out. And yes, indeed, there would be hope that there would be state or federal resources to help with vaccine administration. Again, what we're focused on is providing the services that are needed right now for everybody's safety and health. And we'll figure out about the money sometime, somehow. So with that, I think we're through the questions that we have on this topic. Ready to go to the next one? This is fiscal 22. So although it's really important to pay attention to 21, and I think Joanne gave you some great answers about how we are watching so carefully. We had a budgeted plan for 21, but we're also looking at the actuals from last year and this year and watching how they come together. Your continued vigilance on spending is important to us as we go ahead for 21. And for students who are out there, for faculty who work with those students, for families, we invite you back. We're doing the very best we can to provide you with terrific educational experiences here at UMaine, and we're prepared to do that, and that's a priority for us. So as we look ahead, something I wanted to talk a bit about, and I'm sure we have UMaine Machias folks on this line, we are moving to the next levels of our partnership between the University of Maine and UMaine Machias, and I'm going to turn to Vice President and Head of Campus Quals in a moment to speak to this, but I just have to say, have to say personally that this partnership is turning out to be one of the most exciting and promising, interesting areas of work for me here at the University of Maine, because these two campuses are very, very different. They offer extraordinarily different and I believe complementary kinds of assets and affordances. And we've had this partnership in place. Dan has led his faculty, staff, and students in discussions about where we're going. And I'll turn it to you, Dan, to say a bit about how that will look as we go into the 22 budget.
Sure. The original goal was to help revitalize our campus, to increase enrollment, and to focus on being more effective and efficient with our operations, looking at the economy of scale between the two institutions. And the lion's share of that over the years has been towards the administrative end. And with the president's leadership in charge last year, maybe even before that, 2020 is kind of, we really started looking at academic policies and procedures and looking at a common course catalog is what's on the table right now. And as part of the original primary partnership plan, the plan has always been to fold our budget, to integrate our budget into UMaine's budget. We already, our chief business officer is the same as the University of Maine's. And so we're planning on July 1st of 2021 to fold that budget into the UMaine budget. I don't remember what the original plan was. I think it was maybe to do this in 2020 or maybe even
I think it
2019.
was, yeah.
Okay.
It was earlier. And there were a lot of good reasons for not doing it, but I think we are at the point where we've coalesced in ways that make it a very reasonable thing to do. So stay tuned for that. But that's one pretty important, significant part of the 21 planning, 22 planning. So with that, I'm going to turn to Joanne to talk to us about how we build the budget.
Okay, so with every year's budget, why we start with a set of assumptions. And several of those assumptions come to us from the university main system office. And then a number of the assumptions are our own campus assumptions. So we list here on the left some major revenue assumptions, and enrollment is, of course, a very important one, and one we're going to spend a little time on in the next slide. The student tuition and fees is determined by increases and so forth is determined by the Board of Trustees. The state appropriation, we're hoping the governor's budget will continue to stick or even better at flat. And financial aid, residential students, and research revenue, IDC, those are all University of Maine determined assumptions, and we're working on those for year 22 and have some range of ideas right now. On the major expense side assumptions, compensation and benefits, benefit rates, compensation rates of increase are determined at the system level. And the system also gives us estimated inflationary increases for us to use for such purposes as utilities and other fixed costs. Then on the investment and the strategic priority side, which is where we want to get to that question about our diversity initiatives, why we are going to determine what it is that we want to make for investments in our fiscal year 22 and beyond. And I'm sure President Farini Money will talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. Capital expenditures, why the system office does give us guidelines on what kind of increases in capital expenditures. And we also have some other contractual commitments, of course. So those are some routine assumptions that we use to work into our budget. Let's just talk about enrollment again, and I'm going to let John take over here for a couple minutes.
Thanks, Joanne. So as you can see here, we utilize two scenarios for our UMaine preliminary fall 21 enrollment projections. So the first scenario is, as you can see, a nearly flat enrollment. And the second scenario is based on approximately about a 1% decrease. So there are four components of our projection. There are the incoming enrollment, there are continuation rates for our current students, our credit hour loads for the projected enrollment, and then non-degree students. And so for both of these scenarios, we've assumed, as you can see, 2,059 incoming first-year students, 478 transfers, and 770 new graduate students. This is similar to what we saw this last year. And so we also held non-degree flat for both scenarios. So where the two scenarios differ is in continuation and credit hour loads. And so for our first scenario, which is what we typically have used in the past, is we use the most recent 4-year average of continuation and the credit hour loads. And in scenario 2, as you can see, we used a weighted 3-year average for the prior 3 years, not including the most recent year. And this was because we saw higher retention this year, though we also had relaxed our academic action last spring, which could potentially be one of the reasons. But we're also using this year's lower credit hour loads. And so we feel that both of these scenarios are really appropriate and good to use. You're on mute, Joanne.
See that? Mm-hmm. So looking at where we are in January, kind of trying to figure out what's this for year 22 look like. Why we know we need to carry over that E&G deficit from year 21 that you saw earlier in the presentation. You might recall that was a $4.4 million E&G deficit for year 21. So we have to reconcile, we have to determine how to resolve that carryover deficit, because that is also in the budget. We have to look at auxiliary revenues and hope that we can get to a much increased occupancy so that we can break even in for year 22 compared to a deficit in the $5 million to, I even saw a number up as high as $8 million deficit for auxiliary revenues in the current year. So break even is a big achievement for us in FY 22. If we can get it, that is the current goal. State appropriation, we've got the assumption of flat. We're still watching that legislators carefully to see where that will end up. So with those major assumptions and some others with investments that we're hoping for, we have a range of $7 million to $12 million for a deficit for year 22. And we've got 6 months to figure out how to resolve it before it's final approval, not even 6 months, by the Board of Trustees in the May-June timeframe. And so we're going to talk about next how it is that we're going to go about this budget process with all your help to figure out how to get us close to break even for year 22.
And I'm going to actually take a question that came in about vaccines and then come back to this slide. But the question is, will the university require vaccines for those on campus? Which is a fair question and a great question. I certainly can say with confidence that there will be a strong campaign to encourage participation in the vaccination program. We know that is one of the keys to keeping our communities safe. At this point, we are not sure that we do not expect to require the vaccine, as at this time it has an approval that is emergency use authorization. But do look for our education campaign on the vaccine, and if people are interested in helping us with that, do let me know. Wanted to turn now to thinking about the future and about the 22 budget, and to point out that you heard Joanne speak about the realistic potential deficit that we would face for 22. And I just want to be very reassuring to people. This is part of the good work that goes on in crafting a budget. It is not alarming, although those are big numbers and they sound alarming. But we will all work together to figure out how to do this. And we have lots of tools at our disposal, really, for getting to a balanced budget, including, although not ideal, including some of the tools we've used this year, right? Counting on external funding that will come in to help us, counting on looking to our reserves, which we really want to avoid doing, and continuing our good work together that has been launched through strategic vision and values, and that will continue to really make our universities the places that we think they should be for the future. And we'll do that together with all of you. So the first thing I simply wanted to emphasize was that, and as the provost said, we will be using the strategic vision and values work as a base for our thinking about the future. And just to help people out, I put the website back here so that you could find it easily. And for those who haven't been spending their time poring over the SVV website, it's not a bad time to refresh for all of us. There was excellent work done on that. We shifted to pandemic and to define tomorrow so that we could try to handle some immediate challenges. But the good work that so many of you are involved in, not only establishing the 3 areas, the 3 strategic values, but to establish 3 working goals that would guide our efforts here on the campuses for the near term. And within those goals, and if you've looked at it lately, you have goal 1 and then 1.1 and then 1.1a, and people put in their nominations for actual projects and work that they would like to pursue in order to address the goals. And we will be coming back to that. And I would imagine we may be refining these goals and adding more. A lot has happened. a great deal has happened since these were first written, but we wanted this always to be a living document, and so it will guide our budget. And I just put the 3 goals here as a reminder for all of us. A strong commitment as the land grant to the role we play in supporting and growing the economy of the state through the new discoveries and technologies that we develop here, and through the preparation of the knowledge workforce that will serve our state well. And we continue to be guided by that. So as we face hard budget decisions, we have some frameworks that we will use to try to guide our decision making. The second goal, accessible and affordable education. We're very committed to that. We're a public higher education institution. We are a research institution as well. We stay committed to our research and our public engagement with the state. And we continue to look at efficiency, effectiveness, and quality. And I want to be very clear about the quality piece. That's a very high priority for me and for, I think, everyone here. UMaine provides its students with a first-rate education, and we are not going to let that slip. And goal 3 then is for this university and our state really to be a rewarding place to live, learn, and work. We want to keep our very strong focus on diversity and inclusion, and also commit to the personal development of all our faculty, our staff, and our students as a part of what we do together as an education institution. If someone asked me today how I might revise the goals, I would probably say we need a very separate and specific diversity and inclusion goal. In addition to these, maybe a 4th goal, so we can perhaps work on that. And I just double checked the report of the DEI Council, maybe out as soon as tomorrow. It includes 45 recommendations assembled by a very strong group of participants who talked to lots of folks and who did some excellent thinking, excellent looking at data. And so this is back to the early question about what investments will we make in 22 to realize the commitment. One of the pieces of the charge to that council was to look at structural impediments that we have here to really achieving diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the group has come forward with some areas. I think one that we will see strong focus on really quickly has to do with our hiring practices, our recruitment and retention of our faculty and staff, and the ways in which we are certain that we place a priority on diversity and inclusion and equity at the core of hiring. And there are many, many best practices that we're learning about from around the country that we want to be sure are part of what we do here. A second piece of this report, and I was not prepared to summarize the report, so I better stop pretty soon, but a second piece that has been compelling to me has to do with the campus climate and culture for diversity, the experience of our diverse communities, particularly diversity of race and ethnicity, and how we are welcoming or not welcoming in those areas. And so lots coming, and it's coming right now, and we're in the 22 budget discussions right now. So I think we can assume, I can guarantee, in fact, that these considerations will all be on the table. So we'll use the SVV and its goals as a base. We will be inclusive and transparent, and we hope that you see today as a key step in transparency. We've actually given versions of this presentation to various campus leadership groups already, and Joanne and her team are prepared to continue to do this. We'll talk about timeline a little bit, because there is a sort of moment when this goes into then a kind of pre-decisional process after we've gathered a lot of information with the Board of Trustees and with our system colleagues in their finance areas. So we will keep this as inclusive and transparent as we possibly can. We're very committed, and you'll know this if you've been listening to me as I've talked in my time here, toward the increase in convergence, research and teaching, and interdisciplinarity. Advances in knowledge and in our understanding of humankind and in certainly the STEM fields, those come when areas intersect, when we have crossovers from one discipline to another, and people who are working in several areas coming together to address key questions. And that's a very high priority, not only for our research endeavor, it's essential in our public engagement endeavor, and it's essential in how students experience instruction here at the University of Maine, and we'll keep at that. The best example that I've seen is the wastewater testing activity here at UMaine that was developed in response to the pandemic. And when Professor Rob Wheeler from our campus does his summary and shows the slide with all of the areas of expertise that have needed to come together to solve these very real problems for Maine, it's quite astounding. It's everything from in the scientific side, it's engineers and immunologists and virologists and others. In the operational side, it's facilities management experts, it's risk management experts, it is students from multiple fields, it is residence life. So much cross-cutting work, and UMaine is so well positioned to advance that. So that will be a piece of this. We now have unified accreditation across the system that offers us some new ways to think about how we partner and gain that convergence by engaging our colleagues from across the system. And then finally, and I want to take a moment on this to be as clear as I can be, we will be strategic in this work. We will not, in general, be doing sort of across the board reductions or if we had resources increases, but these will be strategic decisions. And this is not a sort of, let's cut our way to being balanced. It can't be. We must have hope. We must have opportunity for growth. I will be looking for your ideas about viable growth areas for our campuses. What are our special opportunities? What kinds of attractive, future-looking experiences can we start to map out now so that we can put those forward in the budget discussions and think about ways that we can bet on growth in some key areas? And so the way in which we're constructing this budget will allow deans and therefore those who are working with them and others to put forward their ideas, but it will be strategic. This is not an easy budget building kind of process, but it is certainly one where we can start to see some important values that we all share addressed in new ways. So it's a process, it continues. Joanne will talk to us more about that.
So we're launching the budget process, besides with this town hall meeting today, with budget hearings beginning next week for all the colleges and units that you see on this slide. Those budget hearings will be attended by executive cabinet, of course, the budget director. So you see that we have done these kind of budget hearings in the past. Those of you that have been around for a number of years probably recall doing them earlier in the last decade. So there's, I think, there's 20, I might be off by one or two, but I think there's 20 budget hearings altogether, roughly an hour each. And we're all in executive cabinet very much looking forward to hearing from all of you and from your leadership in your colleges, in your units, to learn more about your strategic initiatives, what it is that's very important for you to tell us that we need to know, and to just understand how you all are connected to each other in looking at the budget as a whole.
And timeline, why don't you do the timeline too?
Timeline too, yeah, and this is our last slide. The timeline for the budget is to give the University Maine System Office a preliminary budget by February 5th. It will be very preliminary, very rough. And they've given us instructions as to how they want us to do that. A lot of instructions. Then we'll have a leadership discussion on February 25th with key members of the board, key members of our leadership and the system office. All campuses will go through the same process across the University of Maine system. There are FFT is facilities finance trustee meetings, committee meetings, and those are scheduled for the 3rd, and for the 5th is a first budget hearing. A forecast due for year 21, our current year, as I mentioned earlier, we'll be working on a forecast that will look different from that budget you saw. There's a board meeting on March 22nd. There's a first reading of the FFT Finance Facilities meeting for the budgets, and then a second reading again on May 5th. So multiple rounds of budget review as we work on it internally, and your senior leadership here makes some final decisions to take to the Board of Trustees for approval on May 24th. Last year, I will say that given COVID, that budget process was not the same. We tried for a May 24th budget approval, but the final budget approval after many iterations was not till October of last year. We're really hoping that doesn't happen again. I believe that's the last slide.
It's a pretty compressed timeline and process, and do know that deans and their staff and leadership and hopefully department heads and chairs, school heads and so forth are very, engaged, but you can see the places at which there will be more opportunity. And we will certainly be doing these open sessions as frequently as we can. There's another question that I'll start an answer to, and John can answer as well, and we'll look for more. But it goes like this: regarding the number of graduate students increasing significantly, does UMaine have a vision or budget to equip our campus with more cutting-edge capital equipment to strengthen our research and attract research national grants? So I would start by saying that our faculty have done a superb job already of seeking, finding the right federal programs to bring in instrumentation and to equip labs with the kinds of instruments that absolutely address this question. And I see proposals regularly going out of here to try to bring in that kind of, those sorts of resources. I understand fully how vital those are to attracting students, to giving students the full, rich educational experience that they need, and to helping us advance our research mission, which is, of course, a major goal for us, particularly because its connection to our instructional mission is something we are sharpening. But I'll see if John would like to add anything. I think I saw another one come through just in the last few days. So our folks are working at it. Our research office and Vice President Vararamian are certainly providing support to help our faculty find those funds. We work very closely with our congressional delegation as well. But in the end, a lot of this kind of instrumentation needs to come out of the competitive process with our agencies. John.
Yeah, thank you, Joan. I think you actually touched on it beautifully. And in fact, our Vice President of the Research Office is very actively engaged with this, and as well as with our groups in economic development. Jake Ward and Jason Charland is also very much engaged, who's in the VPR's office and with the President's office. I would add that as we look forward to hopefully future faculty hires, that we will be looking for a more cluster hire types focus, where we will actually be looking to departments and centers and institutes to be collaborating, which is all part of the infrastructure, to be helping advance in these areas, and which that type of interdisciplinary and across centers and institutes and departments will lend itself as we move forward to these type of instrumentation grants.
So I see another question. The AFM contract ends in 2021. How does this intersect with the budget process, if at all? It certainly intersects with the budget process, and there's quite close collaboration as the negotiations go on with the administrative side as we try to design budget. And as you can imagine, there would be many areas of the negotiation and a new contract that could likely be related to budget. I don't know if Joanne would like to say more on that.
Those kind of assumptions on compensation increases come from the system office because they're consistent across the University of Maine system. And I believe that negotiations will begin soon for the next collective bargaining two-year cycle. So we'll have to watch carefully for the way that compensation increases will be handled in this budget, but our guidance will come from the system office.
So before we close, I'll offer one more time for people to propose their questions. I'm also going to ask Dan, Joanne, and John if they have any closing comments, and then I have one. So last call for questions. And Dan, anything you'd care to add at this point?
We're currently working on our budget hearing PowerPoint that we're gonna, I think our day may be towards the end of January, but all department chairs, feel free to contact me if I don't contact you first.
Okay, good. John.
I know I want to just thank all of you for tuning in today. And just to get back to that question on graduate students real fast, we saw a 43% growth in online student numbers and at the graduate level from 19 to 20 fall. And we saw a 2% increase in our non-online graduate programs overall.
That was impressive. Good. Before we go to Joanne, we've got another question. Are there plans to expand fellowships for graduate recruitment, or our current fellowships focus more on completion? And is there any interest in developing postdoctoral fellowships? I think, again, we don't have Vice President Vararamian on with us, but we can certainly check on that. Both of those, simply to me, sound like very good ideas, very good things for us to be doing. Our graduate programs are growing. But we also need to be reminding everybody that our faculty do a good job of including graduate student support, RA support in their grant proposals. And that is another important piece of the recruitment of graduate students. I think that as we think about the Alphon funding, in particular for the Maine Center, which encompasses the areas of law, business, and public policy, and increasingly for the STEM fields, as well as the Maine College of Engineering, Computing, and Information Science, which is a part of the Alphon work. We definitely have potential through those areas to start to expand and look for match to support graduate students. Again, I'll turn to John to see if he wishes to comment further.
So the only thing I might add is, we have a task force right now that's actually looking at potential revenue sharing for some entrepreneurial graduate programs. And this type of model, once we've developed it, will actually be an investment back to programs that will allow you hopefully that flexibility to be able to grow, purchase infrastructure, et cetera. And so, and a lot of those, revenue sharing models can help support postdocs and even soft money lecture positions, faculty positions, research associates, that sort of thing. And so we hope by the end of this semester to have that model developed that we could roll out.
Thank you, John. Joanne, last words from you.
Well, I just say that I'm so pleased to have this opportunity to come back to the University of Maine, because I was here prior a decade or so ago, and to be able to make a contribution at this time. And so thank you all for having me come back. And I just know that we're going to be able to come out with a successful, strategic, growth-oriented budget for year 22 and beyond, because we'll be doing multi-year planning as well. And I know it's going to be hard, and I know you're all going to be there to help us. But I just want you to know that I'm so pleased to be able to be back and be able to make that contribution at this point in my career. Thank you.
Okay, then, last call for questions. We're ending a little bit early. And I would like to do one more thing, because there is a sort of, there's an invisible backbone for all of what we do that needs a special recognition here. And that is an organization at the University of Maine, and UMaine Machias has its own components as well, called the Emergency Operations Center. That is the group of individuals who actually make it possible for these universities to stay open safely. They make it possible to figure out how to address any challenge that comes our way. whether it is to do with natural disasters and snow, or if it's to do with how to start a testing campaign, or how to check on whether any individual organization in the university can change its plans for reopening or for closing in alignment with state guidance and so forth. And I've had only a little bit of a window into the work that these individuals do, but I think it's pretty fair to say that the team here at the University of Maine and at Machias, they basically haven't even had a break of any kind. They're sort of round the clock since last March. And I think if there were a way to do group applause right now, I want to be really sure to send a thank you to the EOC members. And right now they are in the midst of trying to figure out how we reopen, how we do testing, how we manage everything that's coming our way. And they do it with professionalism, with a positive attitude, and with tremendous success and energy. So consider this a virtual applause to the EOC.
I was trying to get it up, Joan, but I'm not fast enough.
We had a slide, but we won't have that slide, but I really do mean this sincerely. The slide will be in when we post the presentation. And again, a broader thanks to all of you for watching, for being here, for being interested enough to stick with us through the details of, a budget presentation isn't always the most appealing kind of thing to everybody, but it's really a part of the work we do together as a university. So I appreciate your interest. Do be in touch. If you have further questions, we will post these slides as soon as we can. And best wishes to all for a good afternoon. Thank you.